Masechet Ketubot Daf Sadi Tet. We're talking about a case where someone sends an agent and says, go and sell on my behalf a half of a cord. But he goes and sells more than he was asked for. He sold for him a full cord. So here, do we say that the first cord, the half that he sold, well, there the agent was doing what the sender sent him to do, so that's a valid sale. But the second half is invalid because he was not authorized. Or do we say, since he changed the instructions, so therefore the agent is not an agent at all, and even the first half that he sold is invalid. In other words, if the agent adds to what the sender sent him to do, then is the entire agency totally invalid? Or do you say he's just adding? So the added part is invalid, but the base amount is okay. That's the first question. Later on in this stuff, we're going to get to the opposite question. If an agent does less than he is sent to do, then is that valid, or is that entire thing invalid? Okay, so that's the question. We attempted one proof yesterday, but it didn't work. And now we're going to attempt a proof from our Mishnah. Tashema. Hayta ketubata maneh. Umachra shave maneh v'dinar b'maneh michra batel. If the ketubah was worth one maneh, this is the second case in the Mishnah, second of three cases in the Mishnah. She's owed 100. And she goes, the widow goes and repossesses, seizes a piece of land that's worth 101. So she possessed more, she took more than is her rightful, than she has a right to. She sold it for maneh, for only 100. Notice she got not a great price for it, not a fair price. When she does that, the sale is invalid, no good, basically because she took more land than she was authorized to take. But the Mishnah is going to go on and say, even though she returns the extra dinar, it's still no good. So even though the orphans aren't actually losing out any money, it's still invalid. So let's try to figure out what exactly is the case, and maybe we could use this to prove an answer to our to our question and prove that in fact it's no good, right? That it's void. So here, my love. So let's hypothesize that we interpret the Mishnah the following way. Tezaben shaveh maneh v'dinar b'maneh v'dinar. Maybe the land was worth 101 and she sold it for 101. Unlike what it seems to say. Umay b'maneh, when it says that she sold it for 100, what the Mishnah means to say is maneh shelah, she sells and covers her entire amount of her ketubah, which is 100. And she has an extra dinar left over. Umay afilu, and then the second part, what does it mean that even if she returns the extra dinar, that means that is adding an added case that even if she goes and takes that dinar, buys back that amount of land and returns to the orphans land worth a dinar, in that case you might think it's totally fine because she took 101 worth of land. She sold it all, kept $100 dinar for her ketubah, got the other dinar, got the land back, returned the land. So the orphans have exactly what they're supposed to have, right? They gave up one land worth 100, and she has 100. So everything's back to perfect. What the goal is supposed to be. So you might have thought it's fine, and yet it says the sale is void. So what can we learn from here? An answer to our question: because we're picturing the orphans as if they're the senders, and the widow as if she's the messenger. And so because the sender said, you are authorized to sell 100, and she goes and sells more, the sale is invalid, even though she's doing more, and it includes the 100. Nevertheless, we don't say that the part that she is authorized to do is valid and the extra part is invalid. No, because once you change the instructions, she does something different than what she's authorized. The whole sale to begin with was invalid, and they're going to have to go and do it all over again. So this reading, a hypothesized reading, would be a good proof that the entire thing is invalid. But we're going to reject it. Amar Rav Huna bered Rav Natan. Lo bide ozil. No, maybe it's talking about, read the Mishnah in its regular peshat way, which is she took land that's worth 101 and she got a bad deal. She discounted it and she only got 100. So that's why it's invalid, because it's an error in sale. If I send you to go and sell on my behalf and you get a bad price, then it's invalid. I didn't ask you to do a bad job, to ruin things for me, right? I'm asking you to do a competent job. And so maybe that's why. And there's no proof from here. And now we say, no, let's uphold the proof. Look at the third case of the Mishnah. That's a case where she does in fact sell it for a reduced price, and it's invalid. So we already know that. So we wouldn't need the second clause to teach me the same thing. What's the third clause? The last case in the Mishnah was where she's owed 400 and she sells 4 pieces of land to cover that. The first 3 are worth 100 and she sells them for 100, so that's totally fine. But the last one was worth 101, but she got a reduced, she sold it for a reduced price of 100, and that is invalid. And isn't that because she got a bad price, and so she therefore did a bad job as a messenger, and that's why. But the other 3 are fine. Because she got a good price. So we already know that a messenger who gets a bad price, the sale is void. I know that from the third case of the Mishnah, so therefore I don't need it for the second case of the Mishnah. And therefore, since the third case of the Mishnah, the last case of Mishnah is where she got a reduced price, it must be the second case of the Mishnah is where she did not get a reduced price. She got the right price, 101, and nevertheless, it's no good. So our proof is upheld, that a messenger who does more than asked is nullified. No, in fact, it could be that both of these clauses, the second and third clause, are both where she in fact reduced the price. And so there's no proof. And the third case is still necessary because it's adding an extra point. In the third case, by adding that there's 4 pieces of land, and saying that in the first 3 cases, had she taken 101 and sold it for 100, that would be fine, because there she's losing out on herself, because she's entitled to take 101 for the first piece of land and second and third, because she's still owed even more than that, and she gets a bad price for it. She's going to swallow the loss, right? And she's gonna just not be able to collect as much. She got 101. That's considered 101 off of the tab of the orphans, and she, even though she only has 100 in her pocket. So I would, so therefore, this teaches me that if it's just her loss, then it is a valid sale. But when it's the last piece of land, and then the orphans are going to suffer the loss, then it's invalid. So I wanted to teach us that by contrasting and say only the last one is invalid, but the first 3 sales, were they 101 for 100, those would be valid. And so that's why we need the third case. Hold on, we ask. Actually, we already know this principle from the very first clause of the Mishnah that says, the first case of the Mishnah, if we remember, was when she was owed 200 and she sold 100 for 200, or she was owed again 200, but she sold a piece of land worth 200 only for 100. The sale is valid and it's considered as if it's entirely paid. So from this second part of the first clause, where she got land that's worth 200, she undersold it for only 100, still it's valid, and she eats the loss. So we already know that when she gets land that is a proper amount of land, right, in this case, and she undersells it, the sale is valid, and she eats the loss. We already know that from the first clause, so I do not need the third clause to teach me that. So we answer, actually we do. I might think only in the first clause where by doing the sale, she's out of the house completely, meaning that's case closed. She got a land worth 200 and therefore they say, okay, goodbye, we don't have to deal with you anymore. And that's where the sale is valid and she eats the loss. But in the third case, I might have thought that I should make a gezerah. If in the first three pieces of land, she sold 101 and undersold it and only got 100, I might have thought I should make a gezerah, even though in that case technically it's okay. But if I allow it in the first three cases, I might think that even for the fourth piece of land also it will be valid. But that's not true, because if the fourth piece of land, the orphans are going to eat the loss. So maybe I should make a gezerah. That's why I need the third case to teach me. No, I would not. I would not make a gezerah. And so that's why I actually need the first case and the third case as well. Okay, the bottom line is we have no proof from our Mishnah that if an agent does more than was asked, that the sale is completely invalid, because we're not actually talking about a case where the agent does more than is asked. We're talking about a case where the agent undersells what she is authorized to sell. And the reason the sale is invalid is because she got a bad price. And so the sender can say, oh, I didn't send you to get a bad price. And so the whole thing is invalid. But we can't learn anything about the case where the agent does more than is asked for. Okay, now we have a whole nother version of this discussion with the opposite question. Vika de amre, halati ba'elachecha damar le'zil zaben lilitra v'zaben le'kora. According to this, is do not ask the question regarding what we just said when the sender says, go sell on my behalf a half of a cord worth of land, and he does more and sends a whole cord. In that case, surely we say he's adding, and the first half cord he sells is valid, and the second he's doing on his own and is invalid. So the additional just adds to the job that he was sent to do. So the job he was sent to do is valid. That's the easy case. What we really want to know is the opposite. The question is, if he says, go and sell me a full cord, and he doesn't do the whole thing, he just sells a half a cord, and he comes back. Do we say that the agent can say, I did what is good for you? See, people, it's always better to have land than to have cash. And people are only going to sell land because they need the cash. So the agent can come and say, I did you a favor, because now you sold half. Maybe the cash that you got will be sufficient for whatever you need. And then if you need the rest, you can always sell the rest. So I did you a favor by doing only half at a time. And therefore it is valid. Because if you realize you don't need the money, then you won't be able to reverse it. After you sell it, it's a lot harder to buy it back. The guy you sold it to may not want to sell it back to you. But if you don't sell it yet, you could always have a chance to sell it later. So I did you a favor by going and doing it a little bit at a time. Do we say that and is valid? Or the sender can say, I don't want to have so many bills of sale. I don't want to send it piecemeal, and then each one is going to generate a separate bill of sale, because I don't want to have so many bills of sale. People look at that and they say, oh, look how he's selling off his land piecemeal, a little now, a little later, right? Like I'm impoverished and I have to keep selling. I'd rather have one sale, right? And even if it's a bigger sale than many sales, I have to deal with all the paperwork. So the sender can say, I didn't want that. All right, so that's the two sides of the question. Now we have an attempt at an answer. Amar Rabbi Chanina misura Tashema Natan lo dinar shel zahav v'amar lo habeli chaluk והלך והביא לו בשלוש חלוק ובשלוש טלית שניהם מעלו. We have the following Mishnah from Masechet Me'ilah. Someone gave to his agent one zahav. That's equal to 6 selah. And he instructed him, go and buy me a robe. one robe for that's going to be worth 6 selah, a nice robe. Now, what did the messenger do? He went and bought a cheaper or a smaller robe for only 3 selah, and with the 3 selah left over, he bought a cloak. And so now he got 2 items. And turns out that money that he originally you gave him was sacred money. He does that designate as kodesh. They were not allowed to use it. So anyone who spends money that is kodesh violates me'ilah. If it's the sender that authorizes the messenger, then the sender is liable. If the messenger acts on his own, the messenger is liable. In this case, the Mishnah says both of them are liable. Why would both of them be liable? If we say that although the messenger did less than was requested, he was requested to buy a robe for 6, he bought a robe only for 3, a lesser robe, so then it makes sense that it is a valid messengership. And in that case, the messenger acted on behalf of the sender, and so that's why the sender violates for those 3, and the messenger himself violates for the other 3 that he bought a talit with, and that's why both of them are liable. He's just adding to what was his job was, and that's why it was a valid messengership, and so the sender is liable. But if you say, no, he changed his word, he didn't buy a robe for 6, he bought a robe for 3, and if you say doing less is changing the instruction, and any change of the instruction is not a valid messengership, he's not acting on his behalf, then amay ma'al, why does the sender receive a liability for me'ilah? Okay, this seems to be a good proof, but we reject it. And we say, we're talking about a case where the agent was able to find a sale, July 4th sale. He was able to find a robe that's worth 6 selah, but he only paid 3 for it. And that's why he fulfilled the job that he was sent for. He said, the sender said, go and get me a 6 selah robe. And he did. He got a robe that's worth 6 selah, even though he only paid 3 selah for it, and then he bought an extra item too. So maybe that's why there is me'ilah for the host, because the messenger did fulfill the words that he sent exactly. Okay, so now we ask, if so, then what did the messenger do? Right, the messenger did exactly what the instructions were, so why does he violate me'ilah? The answer is a talit, because of the talit that he bought. Yeah, he's lucky he got a sale, but with the 3 extra coins, he used them on his own, with his own authority to buy a talit, and that thereby he gets his own me'ilah. All right, so this would seem to work, and therefore reject the proof. But we have to work it with the continuation of the Mishnah. Ihachi emasefa. Rabbi Yehuda omer, af bazeh ba'al habayit lo ma'al, mipnei shechol omar, chaluk gadol hayiti mevakesh, v'ata heveta li chaluk katan v'ra. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Tanakama and says, in this case, where the messenger bought a robe for 3 and a talit for 3, the sender does not commit me'ilah, because the sender can tell the messenger, I wanted a big talit, and you brought me a small one, and so therefore you did 0. It's not like the case of land where you sold half the amount of land, but you can always go and sell more of the land. And so in this case, he brought something that's different from what he wanted, and therefore the messenger is liable. The host is not liable. The sender is not liable at all. Now, if you say that the messenger was able to get a really good deal and got a 6 selah robe for 3 selah, so then, well, that's what he was sent to. He says, go get me, here's 6 selah, buy a robe. And therefore, how could Rabbi Yehuda disagree? Because he got a robe that is normally worth 6 selah, so he fulfilled the mission. If he fulfilled the mission, then the sender should be liable. The answer is Ma'ira ra bedamim. When he says, you brought me one that's small and of inferior quality, well, it's true, it's not of inferior quality compared to what he had in mind when he sent, but is inferior in its monetary value. Because the sender can say, if you had spent all 6 at that same sale, then you could have gotten me a really nice robe that would be worth 12. I wanted to invest 6 sela in the best robe possible, and even though I had in mind what the usual price, if you were able to get a better price, that's what I wanted, right? I wanted to go tell my friends, look at this robe, you know how much I spent for it? I spent 6 sela. Now I can only tell them I spent 3 sela. So that's why even if we reject the proof before, and in fact the messenger bought something that was worth 6 sela, and he got it for 3 sela. That's why he fulfills his messengership according to Nakama, and according to the Biuda, no, because the sender can say, I wanted you to spend all 6 sela to get the best possible. And in fact, this we're not just getting out of the proof, but this seems to be the correct reading from a careful language of the Mishnah. Dekatani modeh Rabbi Yehuda b'kitnit sheshenehem ma'alu. Even Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the sender does not commit me'ilah in the case of a robe, would agree that the sender does commit me'ilah if he says go buy legumes go buy 6 sela worth of legumes, and he ends up coming back with 3, that both of them do get me'ilah. Why? Shekenit besela v'kenit bepruta shema'mina. Because legumes, you get the same quality and amount of legumes proportionally for a sela as for a peruta. This is something that has a set given price, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda says if he sent him and he came back with less legumes, or even if he got a sale and got the same amount of legumes for less money, then he still did fulfill the messengership of the sender, because legumes are legumes. You can't say, I wanted better quality. It's not the same as a cloak, where you could say, I wanted a robe worth 6 sela. Legumes, he got the amount that was requested, and therefore even a Biuda would agree that they committed me'ilah. Last clarification, hechidameh, and what kind of case are we talking about? Ilama batna demizabene beshuma hechid yahev lesela mozle gabe tefe. What kind of case are we talking about? If we're talking about a place where they sell legumes by appraising some article of value. You give an article, I want this much of legume, and he says, well, this is a really nice item, and he'll give more legumes for bulk. He'll give a better price for something really impressive. In that case, actually, when he gave him a sela, then if he had bought more, he would have gotten a better price for bulk. And so we can't be talking about that place, because then the sender can say, I wanted you to get a lot to get a better bulk price, and he would still have a claim, and then it would be an invalid sale, and so the sender would not be chayav me'ilah. So amar papa b'atade chayle bechane da'amar le kana bepruta. So rather, Papa explains, we're talking about a case not where they sell it by bulk, but they sell it for a peruta at a time, right? And you just buy they don't have the big box. They only have these little canisters of the legumes, and you have to pay the same price no matter how much you buy. And because it's in such a place, the sender cannot say, you didn't do what I asked. You didn't buy in bulk. Because he did. He brought the amount that was requested, and if he got a sale and got it for less money, or if he didn't get a sale and he got it for the same money, it's the same thing. He can't say, I wanted better quality, like the case of the robe. So that's, in that case, Rabbi Yehuda, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that the messenger did fulfill the messengership. We now have one last proof, this time from our Mishnah, that an agent that does less than they were sent to do is still valid. So let's see. Tashema hayta ketubata 400 zuz machra lazeh b'maneh v'lazeh b'maneh u'lacharon yafeh maneh v'dinar b'maneh shel acharon batel v'shel kolan michran kayam. From the last clause of our Mishnah, that the widow goes ahead and she's owed 400. So technically we can think of it as the orphans are the senders authorizing the widow, the agent, to sell land worth 400. So good. So she's supposed to sell land worth 400. which we would expect that would be 400 at once. And instead, she does only 100 at a time, and nevertheless, that's fine. The last one is no good because it was supposed to be she took 101 and sold it for 100, so she was not authorized to do that last one. But the first three kulan are valid, even though that first one and two and three she did less than she was authorized to do. Nevertheless, that is valid. So we can answer the question up above. That is valid, and even though it's going to generate more paperwork and more contracts, still is valid. But then we reject the proof, not necessarily. We can answer as Rav Shisha did in a different context, who said they're talking about small pieces of land. It's not that it was one giant piece of land worth 400, and she split it up and sold 100 to one person, another 100 to a different person, and so on. But rather, they were already small parcels of land that she had to sell separately, 100 at a time. And so, since it could be that case, there would be no proof from. There is no proof from this case whether if it was one big land and she sold it piecemeal, that she did less than her agency, if that would be valid. Here, it was no choice; she had to do. She had to split it up in this way. So we end with no answer. Okay, now a related question. Peshita amar le'achad velo lishnayim. So similarly, if a sender sends to tells an agent, I want you to sell this to one person and not to two people. Again, for the same reason as above, that I like having one bigger sale. I don't like the smaller sales. I don't like having all that paperwork, all that the extra work to have to deal with. Also, it looks like he has to keep selling, like he's desperate to sell everything off. So he says to one and not to two. Then he has to sell to one. And if the agent goes and sells to two, then it's no good because he directly disregarded the instructions. But what if he just says sell it to one person and he didn't say not to two? Then does he mean no, absolutely for two not, or is just showing a preference or a general style of speaking? Sell it to someone, but he would be fine with selling it to two people as well. This is the subject of a machloket. Rav Huna amar le'echad ve'lo l'shnayim. Rav Huna says even in that case, if he says one, even if he didn't say and not two, nevertheless it means I want really one person. Rav Chisda v'Rabba bar Rav Huna d'amrei tarvayhu. Rav Chisda and the son of Rav Huna, I guess the son disagreed with his father, said le'echad v'afilu l'shnayim, le'echad v'afilu le'me'ah. He said sell to one person, but he meant sell it to someone. But even if it was two, or even if 100 people, as long as you sell it, that's fine, because he did not specify and not two people. All right, so we have machloket here. Iklad Rav Nachman l'Sura. One time Rav Nachman came to Sura, where these sages lived. Ulegaber Rav Chisda v'Rabba bar Rav Huna. And the ones here that were lenient and said yes, they can sell it to 2 and 100, came. And they came to Rav Nachman to ask him about this. Amruleh ki ha'gav na'mayr. Said Rav Nachman, what's your opinion about it? He says, I agree with you that he can sell it, the agent can sell it to even 2, even 100 people, if the sender does not specify. So against Rav Huna. So then they try, they see Rav Nachman is being lenient and agreeing with them, so they're pushing their luck. They said, what if, would that be true, even if the agent made a mistake, meaning he undervalued it when he sold it and he got a bad deal? See, since you're already agreeing that, if he doesn't sell to 1, he can sell to 2 and 100, it's still a good, he's still considered an agent. How about if he undersells? I didn't say anything about an error, and that for sure that would be no good. Hold on, they ask. Aren't you the one, Rav Nachman? You're the opinion that there is no such thing as ona'ah regarding land. Ona'ah is overcharging or undercharging. If I sell you a camera that's worth 100 and I sell it for 200, you have a right to come back and say, hey, you overcharged me. That's true for items, but not for land, because land does not have a set value. Sometimes people are willing to pay a lot for a land. They just like that location, right? It's very special, very important to them. And some people will pay more, and some people will pay a lot less. And we don't consider it overcharging, because the value of land can fluctuate a lot, as we see. Okay, so therefore, didn't you say that there's no ona'ah, and therefore, if there's no set value for land, then even if the agent undersells it, it should still be valid. Now, Nachman answers, yes, that is true if it's the owner of the land that made an error and undersold it. Then we don't say, oh, you can go get your money back because you undersold it. Sometimes people are willing to sell things for less, and they're under pressure, and the market varies wildly. That's true for the owner. There's no ona'ah. But the sheikh does not have that leeway. The agent, the sender can tell the agent, I sent you to do something for my benefit, not to my detriment. You went and you sold it, you undervalued it. No, the agent cannot do that. If the seller says, I'm really desperate, I want to sell it for less, they can do that. But if the agent does it, then it's invalid. And how do we know in general that there should be any difference between what the owner does and what an agent does? Ditnan. We can see it from this Mishnah in Masechet Terumot. Torem kedat bal habayit. If I own some produce and I tell an agent, can you go take terumah for me? So then the agent should do it according to my wishes. If they know me, right, usually I'm very generous, then they'll give it generously. If they know I'm very stingy, then they should give less. Separate less, because terumah has no set value. It's you can determine as much as you want. If the agent doesn't know how much the owner usually gives, and if he's stingy or a generous person, then he should do the medium amount, which is 2%, 1 in 50. That's the average, and so just do that. If the agent does 10 less or 10 more, meaning a 40th or a 60th, if he's off by that amount from the middle, that's also valid, because you give some leeway to the agent, right? But if he does more, if you would give a 30th, a 20th, then the owner can come and say, I never wanted to give that much. Most people don't give that much. And then the agent is no good. So here we see that an agent is limited in his agency. He has to get it about right, what the owner would want. Whereas the Baraita says regarding the owner, that if the owner, he put his hand, he says, whatever I get with my hand is going to be terumah, and turns out he got a 20th of the produce, then that is terumah. He can't say, I didn't mean it. So he can't change his mind later on. That becomes terumah. So we see that an owner, he has a right to grossly overvalue or undervalue, give a lot more and give a lot less, even though his agent does this. If the agent does the same thing, it's not valid. So we see that's true regarding terumah, and this is a model that we could say is true for the land value also. An owner can overvalue or undersell his land, but an agent cannot do the same. Okay, one more point regarding people being particular about having too many documents out there and all that paperwork. Tashema heta ketubata 400 זוז מכרה לזה במנה ולזה במנה, לאחרון שווה מנה ודינר במנה, שלאחרון בטל ושכולן מכרן קיים. So back to the last part of the Mishnah, we see here that she can sell, she even though she's owed 400, it's permitted for her to sell 100 at a time. And the last one is only invalid because she sold too much land. But otherwise, if she sold each one for 400, all four of them, then it would be valid, even though she's selling it piecemeal and she's generating a lot of documents. So can we prove from here that people are okay with having a lot of documents and having their land sold to many people? And the answer is not necessarily. Amar Rav Shisha bered Rav Idi b'ketine. As we saw already, the sugya before was actually quoting this. Before it said Kida Amar Rav Shisha. So this is the earlier part of it, chronologically. So he said, no, we're talking about small pieces of land that have to be sold individually. And so that case is certainly okay for the widow to sell them individually, but we can't prove here one way or another. Perhaps people would mind selling, if it could be sold as one big piece of land with one contract, then people would, owners would be particular and want their agent to do that. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen v'Amen.